Okay, so thanks for coming out. It's a Friday afternoon, but it is kind of cold, so it's warm in here, so we can deal with that. I want to talk about linguistic inequality in higher education. It's an issue that has been around a long time. I mean, in a sense, it's been around as long as we have had higher education in one form or another. And it takes on a particular sort of format in today's higher education institutions. So why does language matter on campus? This is an appropriate card because notice it says, I don't judge people based on race, color, creed, color, or gender, which is something sort of most universities fully endorse now and try to practice. But it then comes back, I judge people based on spelling, grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure. So in a sense, it says, well, I don't judge people based on these canonical kinds of diversity issues. I do judge people on the basis of language. So in a sense, it says, oh, there's this dimension of sort of inclusion and representation that I don't support. Which is something that Lippy Green, in the famous quote, said, discrimination based on language variation is so commonly accepted, so widely perceived as appropriate that it might be seen as the last back door to discrimination, and the door stands wide open. Okay, so imagine this scenario. You go for a job interview, right? And somebody says, I'm sorry, you're the wrong color or the wrong sex. If they walk out and immediately there's a suit. If they say, you don't talk right, you go out and feel bad about yourself, right? Well, is that a kind of discrimination? Which brings us to, this is an old video that a bunch of linguists gathered and convinced HUD to produce when we were working with them on sort of equity and it's about 10 years old. And I sort of debated, well, probably all of you have seen this before. Is that true? Okay. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to play it because I was just reminded, I was listening to the radio the other day and I heard a very similar sort of advertisement for this sort of linguistic profiling kind of issue. So I said, the point is it's old, but it's still current, okay? So we'll just sort of play this for you. I'm sure some of you have seen it.
Hello. Yes. Can I ask a few questions about the apartment on Park Street?
What was your name?
My name is Juan Hernandez.
It's been rented.
Oh, it's gone. Hello, my name is Sanjay Kumar. I am calling about the apartment on Park Street.
It's not available.
Not available?
Hello, my name is Tyrone Washington. I'm calling about the apartment on Park Street.
Just been rented.
Hello, I am Chen Ling. My name is Khalid bin Ali. I'm Tuan Vo.
Hello, my name is Moshe Goldberg.
I use a wheelchair. It's gone. Not available. All right. Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Graham Wellington. I'm calling about the apartment for rent on Park Street. Is that still available?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Really?
Housing discrimination is illegal. If you think you've been a victim because of your race, color, national origin, sex, religion, disability, or family status, call us. Fair housing. It's not an option. It's the law.
Okay, so this sort of is typically known as linguistic profiling. Actually, part of my motivation for sort of bringing it up, although it's 10 years old, is the fact that I just finished a case in St. Louis, which is exactly of this type, where a young black gentleman called for an apartment, was told it was taken. His father, who was white, called following it and was told it was available. And so they pursued a complaint with HUD, and actually they won their case, all right? And we know that it can happen in lots of different contexts, and these are simply some of the contexts. How frequent is it? It's estimated between 2 to 4 million cases annually of linguistic profiling related to housing, which is why it's still a very current issue. And of course, here is the Fair Housing Act that discriminates that is against discrimination in terms of race, color, religion, sex, familial status, or national origin. Notice it doesn't include language, but the case that I gave you is definitely about language. One of the ways in which language is often hidden or actually dismissed. This is another sort of quote, well, it's not a sort of quote, it is a quote, from the Economist, all right, 7 years ago, but it's so true. The collision of academic prejudice and accent is particularly ironic. Academics tend to the center left nearly everywhere and talk endlessly about class and multiculturalism, and yet accent and dialect are still barely on many people's minds as deserving respect. So what I'm trying to say is that universities, including its professors, staff, and so forth, tend to be left, progressive, whatever you want to call it. But language is not one of the things that is typically included, all right? And the point of this address is it must be included. My final point is that there's a canon of diversity, all right, that is developed. And it has its typical sort of components, sex, race, religion, sexuality, and so forth. And where is the name language? It's not in there, okay? So let me just sort of give you a very brief background on this. Where did it start? Well, it started with power and identity in the original universities. Universities were just for the elite originally, all right? And I had a picture of the Harvard gate, one of the first colleges that had this, but I found, Rutgers has a gate too. So we'll use that gate instead of the Harvard gate here, right? And so originally, there were debates in the university, but the debates by the university founders were over elitist languages. Which should we study Latin and Greek, The education was for the elite, and these were the languages to be studied as the elite languages. After World War II, when the Veterans Act was applied, and a college education became much more accessible to a wide range of people, these things changed, and languages were included in that, modern spoken languages. But there was still a kind of elitism, even in the fact that so people learned Spanish. What kind of Spanish did they learn? People learned Italian. What kind of Italian did they learn? People learned German, but they didn't learn Schwäbisch, a dialect of German. They were all these sort of standardized norms of language that are in fact elitist when you come right down to it. And the fact of the matter is college education is elitist, and the language choices are a reflection of that elitism. And so that is kind of a starting point. And one of our concerns today is we didn't realize how elitist college education was, and now we're confronting some of the elitist themes that reverberate through it. So language diversity in university life. Here's the thing. Academics are gatekeepers, guardians, and authorities in the use of language. Okay, so that's where we go. And I'll tell you my personal story. The Academy provides models for students in the normative uses of academic English. So I come from a family of 6, was born in North Philadelphia in one of those row houses, never knew a college graduate, so I went to the Midwest, to Illinois, to play college football, okay? So that sort of was my attraction. I wanted to continue playing basketball and football, and so I went to college, all right? And when I got there, I realized that my speech, which was totally normal, I had barely been outside of North Philadelphia. I hadn't been west of Lancaster, and I hadn't been east of New York City. So I went to college there, and people were constantly commenting about my dialect. I didn't know what a dialect was. I didn't know I had one. I spoke like everyone around me, which was normal, all right? But it happened to be Philadelphia dialect, which said things distinguish between bad and sad, and also attitude and gratitude and beautiful. And I pronounce coffee as coffee. Well, Okay, and so I went there. Here's what's interesting. A few years back, I went to the 50th reunion of our undefeated football team that I played on. And I hadn't seen some of these guys for 50 years, so we were sitting at a table, and somebody decided, let's talk about what we remember about these people from back in the day. Guess what they remembered about me? You talked funny. You were funny, and you were pretty good in languages. But the first thing they mentioned was my talk, which was from 50 years ago when they first met me. So knowing that and being quite insecure as the first kid to go to college, I tried to change my speech, okay? So I found a sociology prof in first year, and I said, I'm going to emulate his speech because that guy is kind of cool. I like him, and so I tried to sort of mimic his speech. I came back to Philadelphia for Christmas. I had a girlfriend who happens to have been my wife for the last 59 years. All right. And she said, Walt, you changed your speech. You sound like you're Southern. The guy I was mimicking was from Tennessee and had a Southern dialect, but he was normative to me. So I was pronouncing things. This was a religious school. Christ is Christ. And she said, why are you talking like that? I said, because I found this guy that was a model. And I wanted to talk like him. But she said, yeah, but it's Southern. It's not Philadelphian. And so sort of we have these recollections, which is not unlike college. Lots of kids come to college. They've been living in their neighborhoods, whether it's Appalachia, whether it's Manhattan, whether it's Jersey City. They come to college, and for the first time, they're exposed to this diversity, all right? And it becomes quite noticeable. And we'll talk about that in terms of our study in a second. But the thing about it is that, with that sort of influence of that professor on my life, what we see is that students' attitudes about themselves, university, and participation are affected by language diversity and the college experience. And here's my point. Gatekeepers are in the best position to crash the gates, all right? So if we don't crash the gates, who will? Because here's another seemingly extreme comment I'm going to make. And that is, not only do universities sort of align with the linguistic subordination of different ways of speaking, but they're actually an active agent in the reproduction of linguistic subordination and social subordination. So it's not simply their alignment, but they become a primary actor in this process. And if we have any sense of diversity, we'll have to realize that. Okay, so one of my students is a PhD student back in 2012, decided she would look at the effect of kids who came from Appalachia, which is a very different dialect area in North Carolina. She would look at she would actually measure their speech in some of their vowels and so forth. So she would do a rigorous linguistic analysis, some of the features. And then she would talk to them about how they felt at our university, when they came in terms of their language. And so here's a quote. I don't really speak up too much in class and stuff like that unless I feel really comfortable, because I can hear, people snickering or stuff like that when I talk, okay? So I have this exercise in my graduate course, sort of a variety in language, which I offer to all graduate students in English and linguistics, so I get like 30 to 40 students in it. I go through these sort of simple myths, and one of the myths is that dialect is something that somebody else speaks. And so I have this exercise where I play, and I say, that can't be true, Because the fact of the matter, you can't say words like bought, talk, caught, and so forth without making some dialect commitment, you know? There is no dialect neutral, all vowel. And so I play this example to the kids.
Speaker 1. Bought. Speaker 2.
Bought.
Speaker 3.
Bought.
Speaker 4.
Bought. Okay, so I play that to the class, and here's what I found in North Carolina. When it came to the third pronunciation, bought, the students giggled. Okay, these were my graduate students, some of whom were linguistic majors, all right? And so I asked them, why are you giggling? They said, because it sounds funny. I said, well, that happens to be a normal pronunciation of that vowel in rural North Carolina. All right, it happens to be the older pronunciation of that vowel in the English language, so why are you laughing? And I said, oh, well, never thought about that. But remember the previous slide? I speak and I hear like little giggles. They're doing exactly what they would not want to do, you know, and that's sort of what I'm trying to prove is that everyone speaks a dialect and you can't sort of not speak English without speaking some dialect. But I picked up on this other message that it was sending, that the pronunciation of bought as bought is sort of country and marginalized and stigmatized in some way. That's really what they're giggling at. Okay, so here's another quote. Sometimes I think that people might think that I'm not educated just because I have this accent, and you hear a country accent and you think hillbilly, and then hillbilly, no education. So I think it's just the way I think it's that way. Which in a sense says, okay, so we're othered because we speak this way. You know, we're socially stigmatized. And that's one of the points that comes for this. All right, that's cool. Students have these reactions. So about 5 years ago, I was giving one of the first university lectures on diversity, about linguistic diversity. And the week before I was giving the lecture, I was going home. I was coming out of the hall, and I saw these two students having a conversation with each other, all right? I think they were flirting to the extent that I have flirtation or whatever that is, all right? And so the guy says to her, he says, you know, Asians have weird accents. They use sounds that don't exist. And the woman says, yeah, I noticed that. And I'm thinking, what the hell is a sound that doesn't exist? You know, like, they use sounds that don't exist. Well, they just used them. So how can they not exist? But you know, they thought it was a totally serious conversation. The one affirmed the others. I don't know if she said, you're crazy, but I like you anyhow. I don't know what was going on there. But that's the extent. And I'm thinking, dude, I'm talking about this next week. And you're a prime example of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, but here's another thing, okay? It's not just students, all right? It's faculty. So we get a lot of publicity in our newspaper because we do a lot of sort of cool research with different dialects. And one of the dialects we studied was Raleigh and how it's changing its southern norms because of the influx of northerners and so forth. And so a couple of my colleagues, Robin Dodsworth and Matthew Kahn, wrote this article, and it got a lot of publicity in the regional newspaper. So I'm standing on the corner going to lunch, and a distinguished sociology professor comes up to me and says, Walt, I read the article in the newspaper, and that's not how older people from Raleigh talk, not if they're educated. I said, okay. But then I thought about it and said, what's going on here? Well, first of all, she's appropriating an expert status. She knows, because she knows old people in Raleigh, and that's how they talk. Now, would I assume the same position with a study of housing distribution and social class that she did? I would say, no, I wouldn't do that. But because you speak a language, you're entitled to have a an opinion about language. So she appropriated expert status, which she should know not to do, on a subject matter that she didn't, which is not an uncommon theme. When the Great Ebonics controversy was taking place in 1996, I did nothing but interviews and debated people nationally who had a PhD in economics. And they were debating me about language. Now, would I ever go on radio and debate an economics professor about the economic structure of American society? No, but everybody sort of assumes this kind of expert status when it comes to language. There's also a trivialization of data. So these poor researchers measured 10,000 vowels, and she dismissed the data, said, oh, your data is, meaningless. And then she invoked a linguistic subordination ideology. If you know better, this is how you view it. So it's not just students and other people. It's very smart faculty. This happened to be a distinguished professor in sociology. All right. So that's why I say. So here's the upshot of Stephanie Dunstan's dissertation. All right. One, that it does affect course participation. So people are affected by the perception of dialect, speaking in class, comfort level and so forth. They are definitely affected by that. It also adds barriers in social academic settings. So there's a need to prove intelligence and overcome stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes that I had when I was in college was that I talked dumb but was actually smart. So sort of in a sense, sort of what I talked about was actually above the way I spoke about it because I was from Philadelphia working class, all right? It heightens awareness of language stigmatization. So the home dialect is stigmatized and it is ascribed a status as the linguistic other. And we have to remember that these kids are coming from environments where this was the normal way of speaking, right? There was no question about it. And all of a sudden they're in a situation of diversity. And so they are othered in that respect. It also influenced by the perception about their dialect. So, Ohio State has been studying for several years now sort of what happens to college students' language over the course of their college life. A very important kind of study. But in this sense, it's sort of like either you accommodate or you isolate. So all the kids from Appalachia tend to hang together, right? And they talk that way. And so, but there's also one thing that was surprising at first, but then not. As students talked about their experiences in different departments and colleges, it wasn't aligned with traditional associated socio-political ideology. So here's the point. All right, so we all know that universities, the most liberal faculty members are in the humanities and social sciences, right? The hard sciences tend to be more conservative politically, all right? There are lots of studies that sort of indicate this. But what we found when the students were reacting, the colleges where they felt the most misunderstood and penalized were humanities and social sciences, not the hard sciences, which is quite different from what you would expect from the socio-politically progressive, which also underscores the fact that people, that one of the things we don't realize, that our prejudices are highly following sort of traditional kinds of things that have been pointed out to us, and some of the other things are simply dismissed or simply not recognized. Okay, so after that, so these were important things, and then we went to the college and said, we got some interesting findings. We went to the Office of Diversity, and here's what we know about language prejudice, and we would like to do a program, and so we submitted a grant to do a program to sort of address some of these issues. It was an important step because at other universities where I've consulted, when they tried to devise a program, The comment of the administration, well, we don't find that a problem here. What's your evidence? Oh, okay. I guess we have to establish our evidence. But we had the evidence. So after that, I said, well, it'd be kind of interesting to talk to the faculty and see what their language experience is, because lots of people don't come from academic backgrounds, I became a university professor from a working class Philadelphia, and I'm sure there are other people like that. So I sent out a questionnaire to a random sort of 1/3 of the faculty, a randomized sample of 1/3 of the faculty, and over 80 people responded, and faculty, and said that they would be willing to be interviewed by my staff and me about these issues. And so we talked about sort of their interaction with students. We talked about their home background. We talked about sort of the intersection of gender. So for example, one of the questions we would ask is, when you were a graduate student thinking about going into teaching, what did people advise you about language? Where we found a real disparity. Lots of women got counseled about not using vocal fry and uptalk because it sort of was an affront to sort of their authority as it was viewed. So they got these sorts of messages from people in addition to sort of how to dress, and stuff like that. Men never got it, right? Nobody said, you got to wear a suit when you're a professor, all right? Or said, you got to talk this way when you're a professor. But women got lots of that sort of advice from, quote, helpful mentors. But anyhow, okay, so I'm going to just give you a couple of cases here. So then we asked faculty, well, how do you interact with people in the class, So here's a Southern white professor, a male, and so we're talking about how he interacts, and he sort of brings up the topic of this one black student. He says, and his speech patterns are very black. He's not altered his speech patterns like I see most of them trying to do when they come here. In fact, it's so much so that he comes across very unprofessional. I would say I have a hard time treating him as professional because he's so jivey in his talk. It's just street talk almost the way he talks. And yet he's throwing out big words and big comments, and I'm like, how can you look and talk like this? Because you're really making it hard for me, all right? So that's what he says. Later, when we're talking to him, he talks about the case of a white woman with a Midwestern voice. And so I'll just so I teach our seminar class, so I'm teaching people how to speak right, and we had this Midwestern voice girl, and her diction was just perfect. And after she gave her seminar, I said, you sound like a radio announcer. You could go on the radio. I said, you've got that nice Midwestern. I said, perfect. It's just beautiful. Use it. I'm thinking, dude, should have been reported for sexual harassment. But, anyhow, notice sort of the difference between the black jive talk, all right, even though he was using these big conceptual words and so forth, and the Midwestern voice of a woman, all right? So then there were other sorts of things that they said, and this is just a sample. I'll just give a couple more. So I'm talking to a white Southern professor who sounds very Southern. And so I say to her, so how about your students? How do they perceive you? She says, oh, I think they like me because I feel they're like, oh, she's from the South. She knows us. I taught undergraduates last year the first time in a very long time, and they love me. I think it had this, she's one of us. It really rings that I had a Southern accent when I hear myself on a video talking. I'm sure that's part of it. And I'm thinking back, I taught at the University of District of Columbia, which is a historically black school in D.C., and their perception of Southern voices is very different from yours. When they think of Southern voices, they think of discrimination, prejudice, and harassment, not solidarity. So when she's talking about solidarity, I'm thinking, like, solidarity with whom? All right? One part of your classmate. Okay, but then there's we also had a number of African Americans. And this is very different because here's a situation where, probably not unlike Rutgers, You know, African Americans are sort of 10 to 15% of our population, and most students are predominantly non-African American in the classes. And so we asked this, well, how do you feel when you're talking to your students, this African American professor? I've been told by a number of students that over the year that I'm very first African American person they ever spoken to in their life. And I asked them, what's that experience been like? And they were it was enlightening, you know, you're so smart, you're so accomplished, you're so polished. And so, you know, how I speak is really important to making sure that those students know that African American people can talk just like you. So what we see is something that's very exceptionalized. She's in a situation where, gee, if I use African American speech, they're going to think I'm dumb. So I need to use standard English so that I'm more acceptable to them, which is quite exceptionalized. You know, when I'm in class, I don't think about the way I'm talking, you know, other than the fact that sometimes I will sort of go a little vernacular on students and so forth, but it doesn't even occur to me that their impression of me as a scholar is going to be influenced by my speech. And that's why sort of African Americans who maybe have total utility in different varieties of English stick to a very standardized one because they understand sort of the exceptionalized role that they have. So all of these things are very complicated. And we came up with I had a couple students, one who worked on black-white classrooms and one who worked on gender in the classroom. And so sort of what we find is the comfortably white classroom where it's normative, standard, unmarked English, regional white language solidarity in the South, so if you speak Southern, and marginalized black speech, all right? On the other hand, the uncomfortably black classroom is non-normative black speech, all right? Exceptionalized black instructors and students. You know, I dare say, how many of the white students in the black instructors class went to someone and said they had a black instructor, as opposed to sort of a white instructor? I dare say that lots of white folks did that, sort of indicating that. And then sort of there's also sort of the linguistic subordination ideology. In terms of faculty and gender language ideologies, a student a couple years ago completed a study of our interviews on that and found for males, there's language classroom flexibility. So if I go into a classroom, I don't really worry about my styles. You know, I sort of feel very comfortable and I feel like I have sort of flexibility in terms of the styles that I can use. There's normative male use, which is the norm in the classrooms, and male language is sort of unmarked and standardized. Now, there's a double fine for the female classroom. So some women are sanctioned for indexing femininity, right? So don't use vocal fry, don't use up talk, and these come from sort of actual statements that people have been told. They're also sanctioned for violating gender norm expectation. So when you don't talk like a woman, then you're criticized for not talking like a woman. So in a sense, you can't win. You know, you can only lose. And what happens is that women's multiple social identities intersect to produce unique privilege and also oppression. So the point here is things are not equal in terms of men's and women's language use in the classroom in terms of student perceptions. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that the language variation is a critical symbolic manifestation of diversity. It ironically excluded or erased from institutional office of diversity programs. And the first point, universities are central sites where linguistic subordination is reproduced and enabled. Okay, so we developed this task force, which consisted of a professor in education, I as a linguist, and another PhD in linguistics who worked in community development, administrative development in the Office of Administration. So it was interdisciplinary. We set up workshops, comprehensive audiences. We talk to students. We talk to incoming faculty. We talk to staff orientations. If you want to really see what people think, we have a staff sort of organization where all the staff are together. We workshops. We workshop them, and they have some of the harshest criticisms of the elitist language used by the faculty and administration against them. I'm being critical because the evidence suggests it's a critical situation. All right. We then developed a student ambassador group, which is and got it recognized as as an organization, which the students planned for different activities. I'll talk a little about that later, and developed resource personnel and online resources that teachers could use for integration into their classroom instruction and so forth. So we did all these things. And the point I'm trying to make here is it's not just adding language as a component of the canon, because language intersects with everything else in the canon. So think about talking about gender without talking about language. So how are you going to expose myths about language and gender? Unless you talk about language and gender, not simply gender. You have to challenge sexist and homophobic discourses that exist in the university. Recognize the ways in which language influences gender and vice versa. And the fact of the matter is, all of the topics that are in the typical diversity canon are things that intersect with language. And it's difficult to discuss them without bringing language into the occasion. So we have a bunch of venues that we use in our program. Okay, first of all, we have sort of documentaries and oral histories. So we have developed 14 TV documentaries, all of which are streamed at our YouTube channel, which is robust, and I'll talk about that a little later. We do oral histories of places and so forth, and we work with communities to preserve it. We also have a bunch of exhibits, which include exhibits at the beginning of the school year. We have a big day called Packapalooza, all right, where everybody comes out and there's a sort of festive thing where we get like 100,000 people that come to the university, and we interact, we give out pins, we have interactive computer laptops where they can push and hear a voice and then guess where it's from and then hear where it's really from and so forth. So we do all of these things. We've also written trade books, popular articles. So one of our most popular books was the first text to incorporate a QR. So we have 130 QRs. It's a book written for the public, not for linguists. It's called Talk and Tar Heel. North Carolina happens to be a state that loves itself. And so we sort of build on that theme and say, okay, you have great musicians, you have great storytellers, you have great writers, you have a great topographic landscape, and you have great language. Let's include that among the things you celebrate. But it's different in the sense that a person can use their iPhone and hear and see what we're talking about, because we have all of this stuff on tape and so forth, and so it really enhances it. We developed a curricula, which is the only state-supported curriculum in the United States with a special emphasis on dialect. So in 8th grade, North Carolinians study state history. When we came, there was nothing about the language of North Carolina. How in the world can you study state history without knowing anything about the language of the original inhabitants, of the people who conquered it, of the incoming groups, and the way where they came from, how they settled, and so forth. So this is the only one. As a matter of fact, week after now, I'll be spending a week on the island of Ocracoke, where we've taught a version of this curriculum. It wasn't adopted by the school board until 2007 or 8, where we've taught this curriculum for 30 years. And so we can study, and guess what? It's totally changed the island's attitude about its language. When we came, they weren't sure. They thought they would be made fun of. And and sort of we've taught it for 30 years now, and everybody in the community sort of has heard about it, knows about it. As a matter of fact, I have a standing thing, I don't even teach about this anymore, that if I'm ever on the island and someone comes up and tells me what an isogloss is, I will give them $1. Every year I go, and some middle-aged man will come up and say, "Isogloss, give me $1." You know, and it's certainly worth $1. You know, because sort of it says, oh, they remember our program, and it had an impact on them. We also have a robust media and social media. So we have Instagram and Twitter and Facebook accounts. We have a YouTube channel that has had over 18 million views since we put it up in 2008 and has over 52,000 members. And then we also have institutional programs. So for example, what you see here, and I'll show you a little later, is a copy of our institution. So you can walk across campus and see some of these banners as you walk across campus and look at TV monitors that are in the halls advertising various things. Okay, so here's what we've done. We did more than 50 workshops for the entire campus, from the staff to new faculty to student dorm groups and sort of lots of other things. We developed videos to be used in orientation and other venues, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. We have regular meetings by the Linguistic Diversity Ambassadors. Every month they have a special topic. So for example, we worked with sort of the the queer language group at NC State. So we have a unit on queer language. They asked us to do one, and so we did that for them. For Black History Month, we did a unit on the history of African American speech, where we showed our film. All right, and for sign language, we worked with a sorority that wanted to sort of introduce its members to sign language and its diversity, and so we showed Signing Black in America. We have sessions for linguistic diversity. So I happen to be in the English department, and we do workshops for the people who are teaching writing on language diversity. But if they don't feel comfortable, we will send our student ambassadors to go in and teach a course. So far this semester, we've taught 22 courses in freshman writing about linguistic diversity. And then we also have online resources. So it's a very kind of active program. So here's just sort of like one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to present dialects in a very positive way. You know, so we're trying to fly under the radar and say, look at how cool language is. So in our film, Talking Black in America, which was just shown on campus last night as part of a film series that we're working with the community, here's a little segment of, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not going to show that one, but.
6 feet, that's 2 chains. Call your girl, she hit me back like you rang. I'm the hottest thing you sang. Mental institutions asking me, is you saying?
You basic dude, you tripping. Lace your shoes, think again, deja vu. Play with me, you play to lose. Call your homies, it be the bravest fools. I mean, take the clues.
An individual's ability to speak spontaneously, authoritatively, in the vernacular is not only highly prized.
That's your next speaker in the series, John Ball.
Literally used in verbal combat.
When you finish round 1, boy, you cast a stone. Look at the crowd, they eyes glued like they got lashes on in the draft zone. I'm with some mean boys, run up deep in the Jaheim voice. While you at the crib with your son watching Nickelodeon Teen Choice. You often throw a lot of negative shots at each other, and they're not necessarily genuine.
Your mama joke, you know, your cousin, you know, there's no boundaries, you know. I've heard all the type of jokes, all the type of like direct blazes, or somebody might call it blaze, and it didn't have to be like, you know, I hate you and boom, boom. It's just, we just battled with words, you know.
It's as much about the language itself and the connections that are being made as it is about like how the language, like how it's being delivered.
In Maryland, aiming at Brill, you rolling the flame, torching again. Victor and here again, then I'll appear again. Dead.
As much slang as we use in hip hop, there are probably more people that would have been English majors or writers in hip hop than there is in any other genre. Just the usage of words like metaphors, similes, double entendres, triple entendres. You might not even have a high school diploma and you know how to use these things.
When you're in a situation where people don't own property, unemployment is high, you don't really have anything, but talk is plentiful. It's very natural that you end up in a situation where there becomes a hierarchy based on how adept you are with using language.
Okay, so you see sort of what we're trying to present, and the fact that when you think of sort of the creative energy and capability, you know, what would I be like in a rap battle like that? I'd be the dumbest dude ever, all right? Because I couldn't compete. But it shows sort of the creative and the fact that sort of, gee, these guys would have been creative writers. You know, they're so creative. So it's these sorts of things. So from one of the things we did, and I'm just going to play one of these, is we developed a couple of videos that could be used for orientation or other purposes in which we represent the diversity on our campus. So we got a lot of sort of leaders in campus, the head of diversity, the chancellor, the top official in the university itself. You know, I called them up, I texted him, and the next day he was ready to do an interview. So I just want to show you that to give you an idea of what can be done. It cost little and was very easy to do. So the dialect of Warrington, it's a little different from here, huh?
Right.
So
just like my friends, they don't know what a pack of nabs is. They call it a pack of peanut butter crackers. We call it a pack of nabs.
Well, most of my life I ended up coming back and forth to Raleigh, so I'm pretty adjusted to the accent. But a lot of people tell me I have a country accent.
Do you think you do?
Yes, but it's not indicative of Franklinton. I just have a different. My mama doesn't sound anything like me. It's just the way I talk, I guess.
When I got here, or when I go somewhere else, people can tell that I'm from an urban area because I talk different, I guess, differently. It definitely is a different dialect because I guess there's a certain slang to our words that how we talk in Durham, so.
Where is Chapel Hill? On here?
Oh, we took Chapel Hill off.
I was actually born in Charleston, South Carolina, and then I went to England when I was 5.
So how do people react to your speech?
They don't understand why I don't sound like I'm from here, even though I'm technically from here and that kind of stuff.
There's quite a good mix of different dialects, you know.
But nobody who speaks the Ocracoke
I don't believe I've run into anyone with some brogue yet.
Hey, have a good evening. When I came down here, I thought most people with Southern accents, there was only one sort of common Southern accent, if you can say that. And now that I've been here, I realize, no, there's very different kinds of dialects that people speak with different twangs, some of them more pronounced than others.
Kentucky is technically the South, and I have what some people would say is a Southern accent. I sometimes say that the mountains are on my tongue, and I think that if you embrace dialects, you're embracing people in different cultures.
I feel very strongly that language is a critical part of how we acquire and learn culture. And so to the extent that North Carolina State is an institution that serves all of North Carolina, and in that very broad sense, the language and the dialects and what you hear on campus is part of the vibrant sort of environment that makes this truly a university.
I think that supporting language diversity is one of the strong points about NC State. They always say, I love your accent, and then we'll go from there. So where's this accent from and things like that. Then I'll talk about Cameroon.
I have all 10 colleges represented in my world population and through prospects course in many, many countries. So we use the linguistic diversity in my classroom to build trust and confidence and respect, and it makes all the difference in the world by the end of the semester.
我来自北京。我在北卡罗来纳州立大学学习社会语言学。
Mi nombre es Daniel Marcelo Farfán Extremadoiro. Soy de La Paz, Bolivia.
At first, especially my advisor, I had problems getting almost half of what he was saying, but right now I'm good at it, and you can hear I'm also getting some of the accent.
Your dialect sort of depends on where you grew up at, and that kind of defines you as a person, but I don't necessarily think it'll define your goals or how you act or what you do.
Oh, Guilford, oh,
Bam.
Greensboro right here.
There are students here that, sound like a stereotypical Southern person, but they still attend the top university, and I guess that helps it out.
Yeah, they're still excelling. So definitely, I guess it breaks the stereotype or says that even if we are country or we're a farming school, we're the top. We are intelligent, so we're proud of that.
Born and raised in Hickory, North Carolina. Growing up, we were the only Chinese family around. I teach English 101 here, so I get to teach students, incoming first years, about language diversity and about dialects, and have them re-examine their own language prejudices. Language is a part of their natural lives, so it's something that they can readily talk about and, and embrace.
Issues of language diversity are really complex. They're interwoven with other issues of race and sex and gender, and they make up one part of our identity. And it's really difficult to try to tease one out from the other. And so, since we have a general awareness that it's not right to discriminate against people based on sex, on race, sexual orientation, these types of things, we're just trying to raise awareness that part of all these other identities is really tied up in the language that people use. And when we do discriminate against people based on their language, we're also discriminating in them based on their sex, their gender, their ethnicity, etc.
We're proud that we have students from all 100 counties in the state, and we're equally proud that we have students from 53 different states and territories in America, and we have students from 119 different countries. So literally, you can walk across this campus and experience a myriad of dialects.
Where else would you find this many people from so many different places in one little spot?
Where finding the natives is hard.
Yes, it's very hard to find the natives.
Okay, so that's sort of that's a film that was shown at several orientations. And sort of there's nothing that thrilled me more as a linguist to run into sort of a big hall of 5,000 students watching that video up on it. This is our branding diversity, where we actually sort of, so we're the wolf pack, and so we howl with an accent. That's our brand, and you'll see these all over campus where people can sort of get more information sort of by looking at the QR and so forth. We have buttons and so forth that also emphasize this theme. We have other videos that challenge prejudice. So for example, we have people who speak in different dialects and say, I study engineering and I'm intelligent, but in a different dialect and so forth. So what are we trying to do? Well, what we're trying to do is symbolically include language diversity in the institutional diversity canon. We also have a program that is very top-down from the administrative, the top official. The chancellor endorses it, and bottom-up student support. So when we first did the video, the first video we did was we went out in the center of campus. We got a map of the world and of North Carolina and had a television crew there. And within 2 hours, we had more data because students love to be on TV. And I said, okay, put your pin in where you're from. Okay, let's ask you some questions about where you're from now and include language. And so we got all of our stuff for that. But students love to be on TV, so they were drawn to it. And we're also trying to be recognized by the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity as what they call a signature event. That is events that they endorse. And so all of this is working with the diversity office. We've had small grants just because we want them to be invested, not because we needed the money. But actually 6 years later, or 7 years later, 8 years later, the challenge that I find now is we did a great program, but it's not a one and done. It has to be persistent. So no longer is our orientation video shown at orientation event, We don't do, except for the student group, the faculty doesn't do many workshops for different types of groups. And so the challenge now, when you have something and you've convinced the administration that it's a valuable thing, then the challenge, and this is a challenge I'm finding out now, is how do we sustain it so that it becomes integral and nobody can accept the next offer to be the diversity offer of our university and not know that this is critical to the university. So that's where we are in terms of what we've done. And as you can see, lots of things that we've had, like double-digit universities that have used sort of copycat sort of things. They've gone out and developed a little video and so forth, and it's really exciting. And I hope that Rutgers and this initiative will really follow suit in this case. Okay, so that's all I have to say. I've really gone over a little, but and now I'm ready for any questions that you might have. All right, step right up. It does affect student performance, and what we're trying to do, say for example, with freshman writing, what we're trying to get students to do is or the students who teach these courses, it's mostly graduate students who teach these courses, is to consider dialect diversity as one of the aspects of performance by students, but not overweight the value. So if a person says, we was down there, whoo, down they go in terms of their evaluation. So we're trying to get our teachers or instructors to understand that. And some of our instructors, for example, now have a statement about language diversity in their syllabus and say, we'll help you with these things, but we want you to understand that these are not errors. They're systematic differences and so forth. And while we're willing to help you with these things, do not misunderstand them as errors, and you will not be severely graded for them. Whereas the whole tradition in teaching writing competence has been to sort of look at those and and there's data that suggests that in holistic evaluations that dialect discrepancies take much more value than they should be attributed. So we do these sorts of things with our students to prepare them for it. Which is not to say, I'm going to tell you a story, okay, a little story. I like stories, and as you get older, stories are important. So when I went to college, I had never written an essay in high school, okay? So I got to college, the first of my family of 6, and the only one to go to college. So they gave us, I went into freshman writing, and they gave us an assignment to write a 500-word essay by the end of the week, okay? So I wrote my first college essay as the first member of my family to go to college. We were all awaiting the return of the papers next week, and I got my paper, and it was a double F. I got an F for content, and I got an F for expression. So not only did I have nothing to say, but I couldn't say it. So I was, oh my gosh, I don't belong here, all right? So I have no idea, because I used every big word that I knew to get to 500, right? And it was a disaster, all right? So at the end of the semester, I managed to get a C. It was the one in college, aside from ROTC, and I was sort of anti-military, and so I got straight C's for 2 years in that. All right, and so at the end of the semester, you weren't supposed to change teachers, but I went to the football coach and said, dude, I didn't call him dude, but I said, I really can't deal with this professor. I mean, I don't like her, and I don't think she likes me. Not that that's a reason, but I just don't think. So he broke the rules and gave me a different teacher, all right? Ms. Ludwigson. She talked to me and she said, I want you to write 5 hours a week, all right? She said, I don't care what you write about. You can write short stories, you can write poetry, you can write whatever you want. She transformed my life, because what she taught me was I had something to say. And I could learn how to say it. I could learn those silly, arbitrary, mechanical rules of where to put semicolon and periods and all that stuff. And because she said, you have something to say, this is great stuff, now I want you to dress it up. And I did. And before then, I thought, I can't write. I can't make it through college. As a matter of fact, I called my girlfriend and said, I don't think I can stay at college. I'm really doing terrible. And she said, yeah, come home and get a job in a factory. We'll be fine. You know, she was very encouraging about it. But Mrs. Ludwigson transformed my life because she said I had something to say. And that emboldened me to learn how to say it because I had something to say. But giving me a double F, saying for content you have nothing to say, an expression, and then saying you need help, wasn't really a great help to me. As a matter of fact, it had me ready to drop out of college. So what I'm saying is if we can teach kids that they have something to say, they will learn how to say it. That's my personal story. So all of these articles and books later, I think I can write. You may think differently, but I think I can write. That's why I keep writing. Okay, another question. That's a really difficult question to answer. And my initial reaction is sort of minimally, but I don't think it has that much influence. That sort of, there are lots of professors with different dialects who teach at our university, and we don't see sort of differential scores of students based on the different professors. So, I mean, I don't have data on that. You know, in my case, it influenced my speech because I picked the wrong model. I picked a guy from Eastern Tennessee to emulate when I was trying to learn standardized English because I didn't know, and he was cool. And so I figured I'd emulate. So yeah, it did affect me, but I think my case was sort of slightly unusual, and I got over it. That's, you know, I don't know. Other questions? Well, yeah, the department that I know most about is the education department, because we have a member on our board that's from education, and it has definitely sort of affected education, because after we did the program, we then proposed a course in education that would teach aspiring teachers about language diversity in schools. Okay, so in that sense, the fact that they said, well, we now want a course where we can teach teachers, I don't know the extent to which it would affect people in sort of like a chemistry or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, as I said at the beginning, the critical people in this are educators and people in the humanities and social sciences, and they're the ones we have to get to, you know, and if we don't get to them, you know, and the rest of the college will follow suit from them because they take their cues from them. So we have affected that, and our English department, you know, now has sort of like recently trained people in communication and rhetoric, you know, who sort of are aware of diversity, and so they're very supportive of what we're doing. You know, the old-time people, they just need to retire and go away, you know, so we can have a new day. But you know. But, you know, as long as they're there, we'll keep pounding them. Yeah, so actually we have done some stuff with multilingualism and so forth. So for example, we held one session on sort of the influence of teaching assistants who don't speak standardized English because they mainly have accents from other languages. And one of the things we're trying to do in that is sort of point out that there is data that suggests that students sort of have stereotypes. So there's a study that has brown face and white face say the same thing, and the brown face, even though it's the exact same thing, is considered to be accented. Well, that's not an accent. That's a prejudice and a stereotype based on seeing a brown face and having an expectation of what that should sound like. And so we have done stuff like that. Now, admittedly, our program, because you have many more international students than we do, and most of our international students are in the sciences at State. It's not. We've focused on dialects because that is sort of the more immediate thing. But other universities, for example, like the University of Pennsylvania, had a video that they produced, which was all with people who spoke languages other than English. So they went out on their own with a camera crew and interviewed people, but they were mostly sort of addressing issues of people speaking other languages or accented speakers of English and so forth. So my feeling is that they're totally related. We've emphasized the one thing because that's our situation in North Carolina. It's very dialectally diverse, and so we focus on that. But my feeling is it has total application in terms of languages. So for example, courses in languages which focus on dialects, and social stigmatization of dialects, because what happens in English happens in just about any dialect. So the dialects of Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, and so forth, all have these same sorts of stigma attached to local varieties. And so, but one of the things in our language classes is students aren't very exposed to varieties other than the variety of the person teaching the class. So I took Spanish one year from a person from Spain, and then I took it from another year from a person from South America, and they had totally different accents. They never talked about it. They were just talking regular Spanish for them. And so I sort of had to deal with it. But discussion of these sorts of things, even in introductory courses, could be aided by sort of a perspective on language education. It's a good question, yeah. And actually something I intended to say because, since I've been here, I realized that dialects of English are not as prominent as a linguistic issue here as other languages. And so thanks for asking that because I forgot to address it. I think that's a really excellent point. For the most part, our programs have been sort of at the elementary level, so we're sort of dealing with English departments. But issues like this, really call for sort of an address of these things that are different and what the language of art is like and how it's different from everyday conversation. Just like there's a language of math, and kids can't function in math unless they know the language of math, and it is peculiar kind of register and kids have to have it. So the more we can explicitly teach these sorts of things, the better off we are. But I certainly can't tell you sort of much about the language of art that you would need. But your awareness of difference and sort of who it seems to affect is really insight into what some of the issues are. And maybe sometimes having a frank discussion of that with your students. what is it about the language here that is giving you an issue and sort of hesitancy, you know? And part of the thing here is we also tend to think sort of these dialects as less than adequate for academic purposes, you know, so we don't think of African American language in terms of academic purposes. But, you know, some of the greatest spokespeople of our time spoke these dialects, you know. Martin Luther King, whose I Have a Dream speech is rated the #1 rhetorical speech of all time, explicitly used Southern black dialect in his speeches. It wasn't full of standardized things like double negatives but it was given in a dialect that was authentic to his background. You know, and people don't realize that and have actually lose track of that, but we've done actual analysis of a speech that justifies these sort of claims. So his vowels are Black Southern. Some of the other features, his R-lessness is Black Southern, you know. So we've actually looked at, and actually what it indicates is that sort of the power of the message can make the presentation of the language in the message secondary, which is really an important lesson from Martin Luther King's speeches. So I you know, I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. You know, other things too, like playing a segment like I played, you know, and showing, gee, you know, white people trying to enter a rap battle would be totally inept in terms of their language. I mean, it's not about sort of pointing out the ineptness of white language. It's a matter of this is a different speech register. We don't know it, can't deal with it, you know. By the same token, some of those guys would be totally lost if we were having this kind of discussion in a class. But recognizing that they bring a lot to the table that we can learn from. I mean, the fact of the matter is, virtually every language in the world now does rap or some version of it, you know. Every language. You know, you may know about K-pop, but every language. You know, they rap in Cherokee and Indian language and so forth. So when you see sort of the influence and the fact the most socially stigmatized language in American society, African American language, has given this talent to the languages of the world is incredible. So I'm preaching. I'm preaching, but I'm teaching. And I don't know the difference between things that you believe in. So, okay, sorry. Yeah, well, I mean, you basically have to keep pushing. I mean, I've been in an English department now for 30 years, and there are still some older faculty who need to retire because they won't sort of update their views of language, in my opinion. You know, here's another thing. You know, the fact of the matter is, before all of this stuff that we're supposed to teach, we're supposed to teach the truth, okay? The truth about language. One of the essential truths about language is that all language is patterned, all right? That dialects are not a collection of errors, all right? And so we teach the patterns of these dialects in order to get across. So my feeling is, if we have truth, then we have an obligation to teach it. And so some of the beliefs of people about language varieties are based on misconception that are as great as a modern geophysicist maintaining that the planet Earth is flat. That's how severe they are. And so my comeback would be, well, do you want to continue to teach the lies that have perpetuated our system, or do you want students to know the truth? So that's, you know, I'm not hesitant about that, and I also am quite critical of linguistic departments. Okay? So linguistic departments say, okay, we do linguistics, all right? And this is what we do, and we're sort of an enclave. The fact of the matter is, if you care about justice in society, then you got to care about what is happening to language in higher education. So, and linguistic departments are failing. So that's my message to linguistic departments. Well, you want truth. Psych. You know, one of the things about teenagers is they sort of, lots of their attitudes are by intention counter-adult. So they don't want to think like their parents and don't want to act like their parents. They sort of act like their peers. And so that's a natural sort of thing. Here's two things we learned from 8th graders. Because we've done testing, one of my students wrote a dissertation on our dialect curriculum in which he students, teachers, and students. And here are the two things that kids remember about our curriculum. One, languages and dialects have rules. That was surprising, you know, because they thought, but we do these exercises where we sort of, how does the merger of pin and pen, and both pronounce as pin, how does that work, you know, and it's conditioned by a following nasal and so forth. They work through these rules, and so they inductively learn these dialect patterns. And that's one of the things that they highlight. The second thing that they highlight is that people are really prejudiced about language, because that's one of the things that they've learned from some of these exercises that we do with them, which is interesting. I'm not saying that 8th graders are greatly equitable, but at least they recognize that people have really bad attitudes about language. And that's a good thing, maybe for later in life, when they become a little more sensitized to these things, you know, because they'll say that, they learned that, and then they'll ridicule somebody for their dialect, so they're not always consistent, sort of like the rest of the human race. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to help you and chat with you, and sort of the reason I work today is because I believe in this stuff. I'm old enough to retire, but I don't want to retire. You know, I want to sort of keep working for social linguistic justice. So that's why I'm here today. And so thank you very much.